Hello there, this is Out Motorsports. My name is Jake, and this is the 2021 Polestar 2 dual motor. It might look a little bit like a Volvo, and it's kind of related to a Volvo, but it's not a Volvo. Polestar is its own brand. They spun off from Volvo as kind of this skunkworks performance sort of operation. Back in 2017, they are headquartered in Sweden, and they are owned, much like the current state of Volvo cars, by Geely Holdings in China. So Polestar is a new brand. It is a performance-first, electric-first brand, and the Polestar 2 is the company's first all-electric car. They had previously introduced the Polestar 1, which is a plug-in hybrid sold in very low volumes. You can still buy a Polestar 1, but the Polestar 2 is their first mainstream all-electric vehicle. It will be joined shortly by the Polestar 3, which is going to be more of a small crossover. You'll notice this is kind of a sedan. It also rides a little high, thanks to the architecture that it's on and the fact that it's a full EV, and batteries need a little bit of extra space in the floor. You'll kind of notice this is a bit of Out Motorsports after dark because, let's face it, it's getting darker earlier, and Polestar only got me this car for a few days, and I had to work it in around the rest of my life. So, we're here in this lovely parking garage, and we're going to talk all about what this 2021 Polestar 2 is, and then we'll get it out on the road and see how it is to drive by traveling back in time to when it was a bit lighter outside. Before we get started, please take a second and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We really appreciate the support, and the more of it we have from people like you, the more fun we can have with cars like this Polestar and everything else on the market. So with that, on to the Polestar. Like I said, this is a fully electric vehicle. It is on a shared architecture with a Volvo product. It is called the CMA, the Compact Modular Architecture, and it is an architecture or a platform that was built with electrification in mind. So this Polestar 2 is on that architecture alongside the Volvo XC40 small crossover. Now, Volvo, if you follow them, started off that XC40 as a full gas model, and they are now transitioning to it being a full EV. So the platform was built with batteries in mind. The Polestar 2 is what you get when you do that. So beyond the basic platform, let's talk about the Polestar 2. Like I said, this Polestar 2 is the dual motor that's going to be the more powerful of the two options, and it is considered kind of a Tesla Model 3 performance competitor. So it is on that level of performance. There are two motors here. There's one on each axle, and it produces a total of 408 horsepower and 487 pound-feet of torque. That is all fed through typical electric motors. There's no real transmission to speak of here, but that is good for all that power and torque, and a 0 to 60 figure of 4.45 seconds according to Polestar. Now, if you're not necessarily as performance minded, they do offer a Polestar 2 single motor. It's actually front wheel drive of all things. Usually you'd think rear wheel drive with an EV, but it's front wheel drive, and it makes 231 horsepower. Your 0 to 60 time is down to about 7 seconds, but that's still plenty quick, and you actually save about 300 pounds of weight on top of saving that money, and it's actually the way to get the longest range out of the car. I think both versions of the Polestar 2 are pretty good on range, but the Polestar 2 single motor is going to be your best range at a rated 265 miles. This Polestar 2 with the dual motor is rated at 245 miles. So not that big of a gap, but if you're looking to get every last mile out of the car, especially considering the fact that mileage gets cut down a little bit when the weather is super cold, things like that, you may want to go for that single motor, but in either case, the mileage figures are roughly the same. Now, when you're thinking of your motor configuration, you pick your single motor or your dual motor, and then next up is, of course, your paint colors. They're all going to be fairly dull options. The most exciting one is this midnight blue, which is still pretty subdued, and I asked for an official statement on that from Polestar, and they just told me something about reflecting their simple, pure Scandinavian heritage, which is fine, except Volvo has sold cars in much brighter colors, and IKEA sells furniture in much brighter colors. But regardless, you can get this midnight blue, which is at least a color, and then the white is a nice bright white. But if you want bright color, you're gonna have to look to the inside of the car and to the brake calipers, and that will only come on the performance package versions of this car, which are accented by this gold color everywhere. So with the performance package, which is something we all care about as motorsports and driving enthusiasts, you're going to get these bigger 20-inch wheels with this unique design. You get 4-piston Brembo calipers on your front brakes. The calipers are also painted gold to match. That's that signature color. And then you get Öhlins dampers. Öhlins is a performance suspension brand that's been around for a while. They're very well respected in the right circles. We'll talk more about that in the driving portion of all this. Beyond the performance pack, you've got two other options. They're both packaged. You've got the Plus package, which gives you some extra accoutrement inside and out. And then you've got the Pilot package, which is all of your driving assistance stuff. All of these packages are equipped on this particular example of Polestar 2, and that brings the MSRP of this particular one to about $65,000. I think the actual figure is $64,600. It's important to remember Polestar, being a newer EV company, is qualifying for that full $7,500 federal tax credit, so you can apply that money towards your total MSRP. This Polestar 2 dual motor with none of the packages applied comes in at right about $49,000. So you can start off with these at a much lower price point if you don't want all the extra stuff that you can get with them. Some people care much more about the driver assistance or having a better sound system or whatever. I don't know if I'd pick the performance pack, and again, we'll talk about that in just a second. And so with all that, let's get behind the wheel of this 2021 Polestar 2 dual motor and see how it is to drive. All right, so let's talk Polestar and how it is to drive this 2021 Polestar 2. So this particular Polestar, like I mentioned, has pretty much everything on it. This one, especially of note, has the performance pack. You'll note that I've got the gold seat belts here. That's the easiest way to figure out if you've got it, by looking at the interior of a Polestar 2. But there's also the Plus pack and the Pilot pack, so you've got your extra, luxury-ish-esque touches with things like the Harman Kardon sound system and the LED matrix headlights, and then you've got the Pilot system, which is the whole driver assistance suite. So the one thing of note with the performance package in particular, and you'll note here, I'm driving around part of Washington, D.C. Performance package gets you these Öhlins dampers. So Öhlins is a very well-respected company that builds effectively shock absorbers, and they are known in the racing and motorsport world for being excellent, and they are. They're really high quality. They're, multi-way adjustable if you get the right ones. They're really good stuff. But the issue here in the Polestar 2 is that the Öhlins dampers are adjustable, which is not new. There are a lot of cars these days have adjustable suspension, where you can make things stiffer or softer based on how you're driving the car. So in my case, I'm driving through the middle of DC. I don't want them to be super stiff. If you go on a bunch of back roads, you might want to crank things up. If you are on a racetrack doing a HPDE, or if you're going to do an autocross, you might want them at full stiff. But all of these other cars have buttons on the dash, or buttons in a touchscreen, or a drive mode dial that you control from inside the car. And with the Öhlins, they're actually manually adjustable, which is not so egregious when you talk about a race car. The race car I just pulled apart had manually adjustable suspension, and in that case, you adjusted it by twisting little dials on the tops of the shock absorbers. So you would pop the hood, pop the trunk, and you would adjust everything. In the case of these Öhlins, to adjust the front suspension, you get out of the car after having turned the steering wheel all the way to full lock left or right, and then you stick your hand in through the wheel well and twist a knob, and you count how many clicks you turn it left or right. In the case of the rear suspension, you actually have to jack the car up to access the same sort of dials that you twist left or right. And looking at the owner's manual for the Polestar 2, Polestar actually tells you there are 4 different recommended shock absorber settings. The challenge is there are 22 clicks of adjustment on the Öhlins shocks. So you actually have to go all the way left to full soft, and then count how many clicks forward you go to get them to whatever setting Polestar says is the equivalent of comfort, sport, track, whatever they are. So I love the approach. I love the fact that they have adjustable suspension, and Öhlins is such a well-respected company, but this is so not the way you do it in a street car. I guarantee no one will mess with their suspension like that. I am a diehard track, race car, motorsport enthusiast, and I find that notion ridiculous. So if you're less of a motorsport enthusiast than I am, you'll probably find it completely absurd, and you'll never change the shock settings. And I'm going on and on and on about the Öhlins shocks because the ride of this car with the performance package in the city is pretty stiff. It it is really almost intolerable, to be totally honest. It is so firm, it is so unforgiving, and from what I've read, the suspension, as good as it is for taking turns, you can, I'm going through a nice tight on-ramp right now, easy, but it just allows for no rebound, and that's really it's really not what you want out of a street car. You may want that in a performance car on a racetrack, but here the ride quality of this car is just, it's really, really over damped and too stiff everywhere. And I would say, oh fine, turn the suspension down, but that's a whole process. So anyway, that's the suspension. If you don't get the performance package as part of your Polestars 2, you will get a non-adjustable, softer setup that will be, I think, far more street car friendly. So they put all the press cars with every option so we can try it all out. I would really caution you against the performance suspension because it really, I think, is not well suited to the car. That said, beyond the performance package of the car, there's a lot to like about the Polestar 2. So starting off, this thing makes over 400 horsepower, over 470 pound-feet of torque. It is remarkably quick. It is, if you've driven a Tesla Model 3 Performance, it is similarly face-melting quick and almost disorienting quick away from a stoplight. You have all this torque available from 0 RPM, and it is all-wheel drive. You have a motor on each axle. When you put your foot down, you will be thrown back. And I'm gonna let myself get a little room here before I do it because there is some traffic ahead of me. But in any case, it just throws you back until you take your foot off the throttle. And then when you do, it's got full regenerative braking, so it will slow itself down. You can do true one-pedal driving if you want to. There are 2 other settings for the regen braking. You can set it to kind of a middle ground where it won't regenerate extra power and slow you down so much, or you can turn it off and actually have to use the brake pedal. I like driving EVs with a true one-pedal setting because I think it's kind of fun to really focus on keeping your driving balanced and just trying to drive the car with one pedal the whole time. So I actually enjoy that. And then, otherwise that nice suspension, even though it's kind of a pain in the city, the car does do really well through corners. I'm, of course, now approaching a bunch of traffic, so can't really show you that right here in the moment, but you saw that on-ramp. It's really composed, it's really flat, and you get that with a lot of EVs because the batteries are so low down that's where all your center of gravity is. It's where the bulk of the weight of the car is. It's all down on the floor. Driving experience-wise, I think this is pleasant to drive. Not a ton of road noise, wind noise, tire noise. It's all really well executed. I am getting some squeaks out of the suspension, both in the front and the rear, mostly the rear. Unsure if that's just because this is an early build car or if there's something bigger going on. We'll have Polestar check it out, but obviously if this was a car you had bought, you would just call them and say, hey, I've got this squeak going on, please fix it. And then finally, with the driving dynamics of this car, steering wise, you've got a couple steering weight settings in the touchscreen, and I don't think the heavier steering is really worth much of anything. I think it's fine enough feel as it is. I think the car is confidence enough inspiring as it is. It seems like it just cranks up the effort involved without dialing in extra feel or anything. So, not necessarily worth it, but the option is there if you care to have it. As far as the experience in the Polestar 2 beyond the driving experience, one big thing here is that, first of all, you don't use a key to start the car. You just get in with the key on your person, and when you're seated in the car, it starts to turn on. Put your foot on the brake, put it in gear, and off you go. The other notable thing here is that you've got Android Automotive OS. So Google has an automotive operating system. So you've got this big touchscreen in the middle, and then you've got another screen for your gauge cluster in front of the steering wheel. I like having the 2 screens. The Google system is very easy to use. It is very intuitive. It does not have Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, and I don't care, and you shouldn't either. And that is because you can have apps downloaded to the car. So if you use Spotify or Tidal or whatever for your music, you download the app, you have it right on the car, and you sign in. You use Google Maps for your mapping, and it's all very nicely tied together with the car. It will show you, available charging stations. I think it can show you the cost of charging. It will show you how much battery percentage you're estimated to have at your destination, which is a really nice touch. It's all pretty simple to figure out, and I think it's mostly okay. The one thing I wish they had is I wish there was a physical home button, because you go home on this main screen by swiping up from the very bottom, and half of the time that works for me, and half the time it accesses the climate controls, because those are also placed at the very bottom of the screen. So it's fine. It's not totally offensive. I am, of course, a much bigger fan of having some actual buttons and knobs. You do have a volume knob down here for your music volume, and then buttons for your hazard switches in both defrost front and rear. And the steering wheel has some buttons that thankfully do not change based on what you're doing. They're the same all the time. And you've got your turn signal stalk and your wiper stalk, and you adjust your mirrors with a normal control. You adjust your steering wheel, tilt and telescope with a normal control. So I think it's a little more balanced than what Tesla's got going on with, say, the Model 3 and Model Y, where everything is done through the touchscreen and two little dials on the steering wheel that do, who knows what based on what you've got selected. That can be a little harder to figure out sometimes. All right, and that is it for this review of the 2021 Polestar 2 dual motor. As always, thank you so much for joining us today. Please be sure to be subscribed right here on YouTube and turn on that notification bell so you don't miss a single thing coming up next. If you'd like to follow us on Facebook and Instagram, we can also be found there at Out Motorsports. And if you're looking to connect with other LGBT automotive enthusiasts and motorsports competitors, please head over to outmotorsports.com. We have a whole community over there, and we would love to have you join us. Until next time, please stay safe, be well, and we'll see you again soon.